Paris. The name alone carries so much weight. For many, it's not just a destination, it's a dream. The city of love, the city of light, a place wrapped in centuries of romance, elegance, and beauty. Think of the Eiffel Tower glowing at night, morning walks to the corner boulangerie, candlelit dinners by the Seine. This version of Paris is carefully curated by films, fashion, social media, and decades of storytelling. But sometimes when people finally get there, something cracks. The colors dull, the sounds become noise. The magic fades faster than it arrived, and what's left is confusion, sadness, even anxiety. This is what's known as Paris syndrome. Paris syndrome is a rare but real psychological phenomenon. It was first identified in the 1980s by a Japanese psychiatrist named Hiroaki Ota, who was practicing in France. He noticed a surprising trend among Japanese tourists visiting Paris. A significant number were experiencing severe emotional distress. We're talking about full-blown symptoms: anxiety, delusions, dizziness, hallucinations, even fainting. These weren't simply people having a bad day. They were mentally and physically unwell. So much so that some had to be sent home early, even hospitalized. What puzzled researchers was that these visitors weren't experiencing trauma in the traditional sense. They were experiencing disappointment. The real Paris was so different from the idealized version they had internalized that their minds and bodies went into a kind of shock. And while the condition was first documented in Japanese tourists, similar reactions have since been observed among travelers from other parts of the world, often those coming from cultures with vastly different norms and expectations. At its core, Paris syndrome is a textbook clash between expectation and reality. The human brain builds expectations constantly. It stitches together memories, media, and emotions to form mental pictures of what a place should be. And when that mental picture is vivid and romanticized, as it often is with Paris, the letdown can feel disorienting. There's also a layer of cultural contrast. Many travelers come from societies that emphasize warmth, structure, and politeness. In those places, customer service is attentive, people are welcoming, and things move in an orderly fashion. Paris, on the other hand, has a different rhythm. It can feel brisk, even cold. Parisians don't sugarcoat things. The bureaucracy can be chaotic. The city is intense, noisy, and packed, emotionally, physically, and socially. For sensitive or unprepared travelers, this cultural friction can manifest as rejection. They feel not just disappointed, but unwelcome, as though Paris has turned its back on them. And when you're far from home, possibly alone, and you've invested so much emotionally and financially into a trip, that feeling can tip into a genuine psychological crisis. Now let's talk about the parts of Paris that people often don't see in the travel brochures. Paris is a big city, a real city. And like any major urban center, it has problems. Public transport can be grimy, especially the metro, which is loud, crowded, and not always clean. Pickpocketing is common, especially around tourist-heavy areas like the Eiffel Tower, Sacré-Cœur, or Gare du Nord. Scams are frequent. Homelessness is visible, and the price tag? It's steep. A simple meal can cost more than a fine dinner in other countries. Customer service, as many visitors quickly find out, doesn't follow the customer is always right philosophy. Service can feel rushed, indifferent, or outright rude, especially if you don't speak French or if you expect a smile with every order. And then there's the weather. Paris is gray more often than not. Those sunny postcard shots? They're the exception, not the rule. Add all that up and it's easy to understand why the romantic fantasy can quickly dissolve into frustration. But here's the twist. Much of our disappointment comes from how much we've idealized Paris in the first place. For over a century, Paris has been the backdrop of love stories, the muse of painters, the playground of poets. Hollywood gave us Midnight in Paris. Instagram gives us filtered scenes of picnics under the Eiffel Tower, sunsets from Montmartre, and strolls through perfectly lit gardens. What we're shown is Paris through a lens, often curated by people who know how to frame its beauty while cropping out its flaws. And over time, we internalize those images as truth. We expect every corner to feel magical, every meal to be exquisite, every local to be charming and well-dressed. It becomes a myth we fall in love with, and like all myths, it starts to crumble when it collides with real life. And yet, even with all its flaws, Paris remains deeply beautiful. There's a kind of beauty in its contradictions. The grandeur of Haussmannian boulevards next to narrow, graffiti-covered alleys, the clinking of wine glasses on a cafe terrace as mopeds roar past in the street, a violinist playing under a metro arch while locals rush past, headphones in. The smell of fresh bread in the morning air, drifting out of a bakery with no sign above the door. The charm of Paris doesn't always arrive instantly. Sometimes you have to sit still for a while. You have to stop chasing the Paris in your mind and start observing the one that's actually around you. It might not give you what you imagined, but it might offer something better. A feeling of authenticity, of layered beauty, of timeless imperfection. Paris Syndrome is not about Paris being bad. It's about what happens when fantasy meets friction. When we travel with postcards in our minds and reality in our laps. The shock is understandable, the letdown is real, but it's also an invitation to see places not as they are sold to us, but as they truly are. If you go to Paris expecting perfection, you'll probably be disappointed. But if you go looking for depth, for texture, complexity, even contradiction, then you'll start to understand why this city has enchanted people for centuries. Let the dream go. And maybe, just maybe, you'll fall in love with the real thing.